Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 Arizona Senate race, and I'll be analyzing this race. A lot of people have been asking me for a deep dive on both the fact that we have a Senate race here, and obviously there's an important battle for the state's 11 electoral votes between Harris and Trump. So I'll be talking a lot about Arizona in the coming weeks and months as we approach Election Day here, but today I'll be focusing on the Senate race. And this is a race that's getting a lot of attention, but before we get into any of the current stories, let's talk about kind of the background information. So this Senate race is going to be between Ruben Gallego and Kari Lake, and Ruben Gallego is a congressman from Phoenix. He is a representative from a state that is reliably Democratic, so he comes not necessarily from a swing district or swing seat background. Kari Lake is a former, I believe, TV anchor. She did the weather report for stations near Phoenix, and she was the GOP nominee for governor of Arizona in 2022, and she lost that race by 0.6%. And so we're going to start with her. We're going to talk about Kari Lake as a candidate and why a lot of Republicans are very nervous about her. So if we take a look at the polls for the governor race in 2022, you would have probably thought Kari Lake was going to win because she was up by 2.4% on election day. And, early on she was down in the immediate aftermath of the primary, but she came back and she was at 49.5% of the vote in the polls on election day. And that was actually pretty accurate. She got 49.7%. The problem was that Katie Hobbs, who was polling at 47.1%, she got 50.3% of the vote. So she won this race narrowly. And this was quite the polling error because if you look at the final polls, only one poll in the final week of the campaign, and there were plenty, had Kari Lake losing. It was Maris. So shout out to Maris for getting this race right when everyone else had it wrong. Trafalgar, GOP poll, Lake up by 4. Lake was up by 2 in research, up by 3 in data orbital. She was up by 2 in Targo's research. DFP, this is a Democratic aligned pollster. Lake was up by 4. And then again, you look at other polls which are more well known, like Emerson had her up by 4 points. Wick had her up by 2. NYT Siena had them tied, so they had a pretty good track record there, I suppose. But even then, she wasn't losing in that poll. And she was even up by 11 in this insider advantage poll from, 2 weeks before Election Day. So Kari Lake was the favorite to win this race, and she lost. The reason she lost was because a lot of moderate voters, whether they're Democrats, Independents, or even moderate Republicans, did not feel comfortable voting for her. And the reason for this? She was an election denier. We saw in 2022 there was perhaps no trend that was more noticeable than the trend of Republican election deniers losing in competitive races. Again, you look at the people who Republicans ran for Senate who lost in competitive races, chances were they were an election denier. In Arizona specifically, it was Blake Masters, and he lost by 5 points to Mark Kelly. We'll be talking about that in a second here. But Kari Lake was seen as extreme. Katie Hobbs painted her as an extremist, but on issues like abortion, on issues like the election denialism. And both those issues are going to be front and center in Arizona this year because Arizona is going to be a close state yet again. And Democrats, would be very, very unlikely to drop this issue, and it's been effective for them in previous elections. Now, we also have to talk about abortion because abortion is especially relevant in Arizona this year because there will be a ballot measure, on the ballot, same general election ballot. People are going to be voting for Harris or Trump or Lake or Gallego, and it's going to ask voters whether or not they want to codify the right to an abortion in Arizona. And this measure is likely to pass because broadly Arizona is a pro-choice state. But more importantly for Gallego, this is going to potentially boost Democratic turnout because there might be voters who are progressive but don't really like Harris, don't really like Gallego, maybe they don't feel particularly loyal to the Democratic Party, but who will want to turn out to keep abortion legal or to really codify because there are restrictions in Arizona now. So that is going to be a very interesting dynamic to watch, and there's a chance it doesn't have any effect on the election. There's also a chance it boosts Democratic turnout. So that is something to watch for. But let's go back and talk about this Senate race here because, again, Kari Lake underperformed her polls once. So let's see what the polls say about her now. Right now, if we take a look at the Senate polls in 2024, which I actually already had over here, but if we take a look at the Senate polls in 2024, we see a pretty clear dynamic here. Gallego leads, and the last poll that had Lake ahead was her own internal from July. She was up by 1. Nonpartisan polls, NYT Siena, one of my favorite polls, Gallego up by 9. Redfield and Wilton had Gallego up by 5. And again, that lead has been growing because Redfield and Wilton has done this poll. Actually, it's not growing. I forget what I said. He was actually up by 6, so it's kind of stayed stagnant. But they did other polls, I believe, earlier where they had it a closer race. But in their two most recent polls, he's up by 6 and 5. GOP poll, Club for Growth. This is a super PAC line with the Republican Party. They have Gallego up by 2. He is tied in another NRSC poll, which is their Senate internal poll company. So they're tied there. Then a high ground nonpartisan poll has Gallego up by 11, and then the Cook Political Report sponsored poll from last week from 2 weeks ago has Gallego up by 9. So every nonpartisan poll has Gallego up, and most Republican internal polls have him up as well. And it's not like Arizona is a state where the polls, are going to overestimate Democrats every time. This is no Ohio or Wisconsin, right? Like in 2020, Trump was underestimated by the polls by around 2%. But if you look at other races, in 2018, the polls underestimated Democrats. In 2016, the polls underestimated Hillary Clinton in this state. And in 2022, as I just showed you, Kari Lake led the polls by 2.5 points, and she lost that race. In the Senate race, Mark Kelly was only up by about 1.5 points. He won by 5. So the polls here, there's not really a huge reason to believe they're going to underestimate Trump or Kari Lake, really, for that matter. So we can't really apply a broad polling miss. So the only path to victory for Kari Lake is if she closes the gap in the polls. But she hasn't been doing that. Her lead has actually, or her margin, or really her deficit has actually increased over the course of the past month or so. And we have to talk about the most recent Senate race here because it kind of paints a picture of why Republicans, don't really have a lot to, grow off of here. So in 2022, we had a Senate race here between incumbent Democrat Mark Kelly and GOP challenger Blake Masters. And so Blake Masters lost this race by 5 points. He got 47.5% of the vote. Mark Kelly got 51.4%. And so that was a pretty decisive loss. And Mark Kelly won by more than most people expected. This was a race that was kind of toss-up. Democrats are favored on election day, but not by a huge amount. And Mark Kelly won, by more than 120,000 votes. So it wasn't super close. And Republicans really struggled here because they could not come close to winning Maricopa County. Maricopa County used to be very good for Republicans. It's a wealthy area. The Hispanic and Black population within Phoenix is growing and kind of expanding to its suburbs, but historically it's a majority white county. And in the past, Republicans did well here because they won over those suburban voters who maybe weren't particularly socially conservative, but wanted lower taxes, were more comfortable with GOP policy on economics, fiscal policy, really. And that that kind of explains why Mitt Romney did so well here in 2012 against Barack Obama. But in 2020, Trump lost this county. If you look at how it voted in 2020, he lost it by over 2 points. And then in the Senate race, Mark Kelly won it by 6. So it gets bluer every year. And this isn't just like a random county I'm highlighting because I think it's interesting. This county pretty much decides how the rest of the state votes because this, I've done the math. Around 61% of the vote in 2020 in Maricopa came from in Arizona came from Maricopa. So it accounts for well over half the electorate. And in 2024, because Maricopa's been growing more in the state as a whole, it could be 62 or 63%. So really, unless Maricopa's decided by under 1%, it's likely that whoever wins Maricopa is going to win this state. Now, there is a scenario in which I suppose Kari Lake loses Maricopa by 2, maybe 2.5, and does really well everywhere else and makes up for it. But most likely, if she loses this by anywhere close to as much as she lost it by in 2022, or the amount, as you can see on your screen, that Blake Masters lost it by, she's in a lot of trouble. And so the question is, can someone who, has made false claims with the 2020 election and has advocated for restrictions, for very harsh restrictions on abortion, can she appeal to moderate voters in Maricopa County who voted for Mitt Romney 12 years ago but haven't voted Republican federally in a while? I don't think the answer is yes. To be clear, am not endorsing against Kari Lake or endorsing in favor of her. I'm just saying that when you look at it pragmatically, it's very difficult to see how she's going to win back these voters, especially when they voted against her 2 years ago, and now she's down a lot more in the polls. She was supposed to win that race, and she didn't. So you have to consider that. Now, in terms of Ruben Gallego, I think he's a fine candidate in terms of electability for Democrats, right? Like, they could have done better, in my opinion, but Gallego's been the front runner for this seat for 2 years now, and it makes sense he got the nomination. So you have to consider that. But he's from Maricopa County. He represents a district in Phoenix. Again, it's a blue district. It's not really representative of the county as a whole. But he likely knows how to appeal here to an extent. And again, Arizona's a state that, federally hasn't voted for Republicans since 2016. Republicans have lost Senate races here in 3 straight election cycles. And it looks like they're heading for a 4th straight loss, which is crazy to think about because this was a red state for a very long time. But they've lost to Mark Kelly twice in 2018. Kyrsten Sinema won that seat. against Martha McSally as Sinema was a Democrat back then. She's now retiring. This is her seat up for election. And so, Democrats, I think, are pretty clearly favored to win this race. We talk about the polling, or, we've already talked about the polling. We've already talked about the problems that Kari Lake brings to the table for the GOP. And Republicans, I think, know this. And so if you look at the spending here, it's bad for them. So let's take a look at the amount raised and amount spent. So Ruben Gallego has raised $31 million, which is a pretty good haul considering we got our last report in June. So for every candidate, it's a lot more, right? But if we take a look at Kari Lake, she's raised $10 million, which isn't horrible, but she's getting outraised 3-1 by Gallego. So that's a problem for her. And in terms of money spent, Gallego spent $23 million. She's only spent $7 million. And a lot of that went back to the primary. And so now Gallego has $9.2 million he can spend. Kari Lake has under $3 million. And again, Gallego's raised a lot of money in the past few months when our last report's from the end of June. So this gap will likely increase. And Republicans, we don't know if they're going to want to go to town to save Kari Lake, because I talk about this a lot, is kind of like the Mastriano effect. If a party has a lot of opportunities to pick up seats or to win, to win important races or defend important incumbents, they're going to prioritize the ones they think they can win. That's why in 2022, the Republican Governors Association, they didn't target Pennsylvania in that race, because they saw the polls. They saw Josh Shapiro was beating Doug Mastriano by 10 points. And they said, look, we can win Wisconsin. We can win in Nevada. We can win in Arizona, which is, Kari Lake got a lot of money from them in 2022. We can win Georgia, right? We can, we can defend our incumbents in other states, right? We can beat out Laura Kelly in Kansas. And so they had no reason to give Mastriano money because he was already losing by so much, it wouldn't have made a difference. And so in 2022 in Arizona, in the Senate, Republicans saw a similar problem. They thought they could beat John Fetterman in Pennsylvania. They thought they could beat Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada. They thought they could beat Raphael Warnock in Georgia. By October, it was a pretty open secret that they had given up on Blake Masters in Arizona, because they saw the polls. He was down 7-8 points. He did close the gap in November, so Republicans, might have left town too early, but he ended up losing by 5 points. So I don't think it ended up mattering too much. But they saw that race and they were not afraid to say, nope, we're not doing this. We're not going to give you our money. And so Kari Lake is down by more than Blake Masters ever was in the polls. We could very well see a similar thing. And this year it's even more likely, because Republicans have a pretty easy path to the Senate. If they just beat Sherrod Brown and John Tester, they're going to win this chamber. And even if they don't beat Sherrod Brown, even if they only unseat Tester, as long as they hold on to Texas and Florida, they're going to win. And so they're going to see other states, right, like Michigan, which the polls have pretty close, Pennsylvania, the polls are pretty close there. And they might want to go there and try to beat out those, Democratic candidates, than spend in Arizona where they're down 8, 9, 10 points. So this race, a lot of problems for the GOP. I think right now, if you made me pick, I'd pick Gallego. Of course, this isn't over. Arizona's a close state. Trump could win it, and that will really help Kari Lake. We obviously know she's going to underperform Trump. It's likely that Ruben Gallego is going to overperform Kamala Harris. But again, this state was decided by 11,000 votes in 2020. So nothing is a foregone conclusion. And even though we have seen pretty Democratic favorable results in the past 4-6 years, we have to remember this race is not over. So keep that in mind. I'll be keeping you posted. I'll do another video on the Senate race as we get closer to November. I'll make my final predictions in November. But right now, Democrats have a clear advantage. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Let me know who you think is going to win this race. If you have any video suggestions, as always, please do tell me, because this video was suggested by a bunch of people, so that's why I did it. So again, if there's a specific state or race you want to see, I'm happy to do it. With that being said, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. And like the video, and I'll see you all in the next one.